The Afghan Defence Ministry says it's carried out several strikes in Pakistan in retaliation for attack last week. It's the latest act in growing cross-border violence between the neighbours. Pakistan says it was targeting armed groups along its frontier. So why are relations so tense now? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. There were hopes for good relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan after the Taliban retook power in 2021. Instead, Pakistan says numerous attacks on its territory have been launched from Afghan soil, with hundreds of its soldiers killed, a charge Taliban officials in Kabul deny. But it's unlikely they'll accept any Pakistan demands against their ally, the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP. Crucially, such action could risk opening space for groups including ISIL in Afghanistan. So does this mean border tensions between the two countries will continue to escalate? And where does this leave the 300 million people on both sides caught between the crossfire? We'll discuss all of this with our guests in a moment, but first this report from Victoria Gatenby.
Afghanistan says its airstrikes on Pakistan were in retaliation for this. Multiple attacks on its southeastern Pakhtunkhwa province days earlier. Islamabad said its strike on this border village targeted fighters from the Pakistani Taliban, but Afghan officials say nearly 50 civilians were killed.
The
casualties, including women and children, are tragic and heart-wrenching. It's a heinous act. By observing the area, one can clearly see there are no terrorists or members of the Pakistani Taliban, only civilians who are either Afghans or devastated refugees living here in starvation.
Attacks by the Pakistani Taliban in Pakistan have surged since the Afghan Taliban regained power in 2021. Pakistan accuses the Taliban government in Kabul of allowing the Pakistani Taliban and other armed groups to operate freely in Afghanistan, charges Taliban officials deny.
We have had some incidents on the border with Afghanistan. Pakistan's major concern of terror hideouts and sanctuaries inside Afghanistan remained high on our bilateral agenda.
Most of the skirmishes between Pakistan and Afghanistan occur along their 2,600-kilometre border known as the Durand Line. Taliban officials say it unfairly divides Pashtun communities. Pakistan was accused of backing the Afghan Taliban during its more than 20-year-long fight against the Afghan government. But analysts say the Pakistani Taliban, or TTP, has since emerged as a domestic threat.
Most of them are young Pakistani men, the TTP. Many of them are also now Afghan Taliban volunteers, including people who developed their expertise during that long insurgency, explosive experts in using IEDs. So Pakistan is very much getting a taste of its own medicine.
Pakistan expelled more than 500,000 Afghan nationals last year, accusing them of involvement with the Pakistani Taliban. The cross-border exchanges of fire last week are the latest in a series of escalating strikes, but they're also a worrying sign that relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan could be deteriorating. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our panel of guests to discuss all of this today. And in Islamabad, Syed Akhtar Ali Shah, a former secretary to the government of Khyber, Pakhtunkhwa, Home and Tribal Affairs, and retired Inspector General of the Pakistan Police. In Kabul, Obaidullah Baheer, adjunct lecturer at the American University of Afghanistan. And also in Islamabad, Kathy Gannon, a journalist and former news director for the Associated Press in Afghanistan and Pakistan. A very expert panel. Thank you for joining us. Before I get to the latest clashes, I'd like to perhaps provide a little bit of context to our viewers all around the world. And first, we're going to be talking about two different Talibans today. One is the one that took power in 2021, toppled the government of Ashraf Ghani after that long military campaign against the US and NATO. But Akhtar, I'd like you to tell me about the other Taliban, the Pakistan Taliban, sometimes known as the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP. Who are they? How many of them are there? And what do they want?
As far as Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan are concerned, they emerged around 2006 or 2005. And it was, in fact, an umbrella organization of different mindsets already available who had been fighting during the Afghan Jihad previously. They were then transformed into Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, on a similar pattern as Tehreek-e-Taliban in Afghanistan. And their grand design was to establish an Islamic State within Pakistan. So, and initially Baitullah Masood, then Maulana Fazlullah, and now Nur Wali Masood is their Amirul Momineen. And
their leader.
Then they also joined hands with Tehreek-e-Taliban Afghanistan in fighting against Americans and the NATO forces over there. This is the brief history.
That's very useful. Now, the other thing I want to just clear up for our viewers before we discuss what's happening at the moment is this very long frontier between the two countries, about 2,640 kilometres long, known as the Durand Line. That is going back in history for when India and Pakistan, for that matter, was part of British India, a colonial territory, drawn up by a man called Sir Henry Mortimer Durand, who was the Foreign Secretary of British India in 1863. He drew the map or the line on a map. Obaidullah, this is not recognised as an international border by Afghanistan. Why?
Thank you for having me here, James. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for the lovely panel you've set up. I'll just start off first with mourning the 50-odd lives lost in the bombing a few days ago. Waziristani displaced people who had sought refuge in Pakhteka, and unfortunately the lives of innocent children and women were lost. Afghanistan, upon being established as a state under the reign of Ahmad Shah Durrani back in the 17th century, 18th century, loses territory soon after Ahmad Shah Durrani's death to seek incursions. This area that is now known as Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is controlled by them. Eventually, British control is asserted on this area. The three Anglo-Afghan wars that follow later on end with agreements between the British and the Afghan kings based on a demarcation of this territory. This territory is controlled by British India. Eventually, after the partition, this area is left to Pakistani sovereignty. Ultimately, Afghans still challenge this demarcation, separation, the colonial legacy of this, of separating the same ethnicity, the same people, sharing a very long history together across two sides. So even though it operates as an international border, it is one that is core to the Afghan identity to not recognize as an international border, which is why you would see most Afghan governments referring to it as the Durand Line rather than the Durand border.
Kathy, you are a Westerner who has travelled very extensively in this region, probably more than most. I want you to paint us a picture of this long frontier, because it's desert in places, it's mountainous in others. For example, the route, that spectacular route from Peshawar in Pakistan to Jalalabad in Afghanistan over the Khyber Pass. Pakistan has put fencing in places, but it's still a pretty porous border. Give us an idea of what this long border is like.
Yeah, thanks very much, James. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's very porous. Pakistan has established a fence along the full length of the border now. It completed only in recent months, I think the final leg of it. But really, this border has been used by the different tribes, both in Pakistan and Afghanistan, crossing freely. And also through the different invasions. When the Soviets were in Afghanistan in the 1980s, the US used, and Pakistan used Pakistan as a staging arena for the fight against the Soviets. So there were all kinds of footpaths through, hundreds of footpaths through from Pakistan to Afghanistan that the Mujahideen traveled, that weapons were carried over. It's a huge smuggling route all along that border. So it is a very difficult border to police because there are so many entry and exit points. But Pakistan has put the fence up, and that really has further exacerbated, I think, the centuries-old fight over this border, and it's never really been addressed. And Afghanistan and Afghans are very clear that they will not accept it. And as long as it remains sort of this flashpoint for the two countries, it's very difficult to see how to go forward. But Pakistan, and I think it's exacerbated because Pakistan really has, in the last 2-3 years, fenced the entire border. And that really has caused attacks, even during Ashraf Ghani's time and during when the US-led invasion was going on in Afghanistan. There were a lot of attacks, cross-border attacks then as well, to try to stop the fencing between the Afghan national forces and the Pakistanis. Much, much worse since 2021. Of course, it's really now it has tripled and much more since then.
Kathy, I think it's worth me reminding our viewers that it's also one of the most dangerous places in the world. And you were pretty near that frontier 10 years ago when you were attacked, you were critically wounded, and your wonderful photographer, Anya Niedringhaus, was killed in that attack. It's still a very dangerous place.
Yeah, thank you very much for mentioning Anya, James. That's very kind of you. Yeah, it's a very dangerous place. I don't know now in today's world that it's the most dangerous, but it is certainly a very dangerous place. But it's mostly a very dangerous place for the people in that area, on both sides of the border, in Baluchistan and Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province in Pakistan, and for the Afghans in Paktia, Paktika, Nangarhar. It's a very dangerous place for the people on both sides of this border, and it's consistently ignored. And even when last 20 years, when the U.S. and NATO were there, and any conversation to try to say maybe it should be dealt with as a way to try to establish sovereignty and try to move relationships forward. It was ignored because it's such a difficult problem to tackle, and there's no easy solution, and it continues to fester really on both sides of the border.
Akhtar, let's move to what's happened in the last 10 days or so. The Pakistan Taliban stormed a checkpoint or an outpost in South Waziristan in Pakistan and killed 16 soldiers on the 21st of December. Then there were the Pakistani airstrikes on the 24th of December, and then the Afghan response that came with attacks on Pakistan positions on Saturday. But that's not the start of this. Attacks have been growing all year, have they not?
Yes, the immediate cause of the tension between Afghanistan and Pakistan was that attack in which a number of security personnel in South Waziristan, bordering Afghanistan, were killed, around 16 or 18. But independent sources also stated that it was more than that. Then in retaliation, Pakistan carried out the airstrikes in Paktia province, where there were a lot of casualties. Pakistan claimed that this was a place where suicide bombers were being prepared. But at the same time, there are claims by Afghanistan that children and women were also killed.
Well, let me just interrupt you there. Let me interrupt you there, Akhtar, because you say claims by Afghanistan, but claims by the United Nations. The UN agency in Kabul, UNAMA, said credible reports that dozens of civilians, including women and children, were killed, and they said international law obliges military forces to take necessary precautions to prevent civilian harm. In other words, the UN don't say this very clearly. Potentially, these could be war crimes.
Potentially, yes, the UN has claimed, but it has to be investigated and inquired into. And but at the same time, the Afghanistan then also retaliated, claiming, and they have used the word hypothetical lines, not mentioning that they have hit the Pakistani territory. They have used the words hypothetical lines, as you have already mentioned, that they do not accept Durand Line as an international border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. You will also, if you go back, that in March also similar kind of airstrikes were carried out by Pakistan as a reaction to cross-border attacks within Pakistan, as Pakistan has always claimed that the safe sanctuaries and hideouts of the terrorists are in Afghanistan, and their whole nucleus of leadership, they plan and prepare and send their personnel and men to carry out terrorist attacks within Pakistan. And recently, around 850 terrorist attacks have been carried out in Pakistan, which there have been at least 900 casualties, and most of those attacks have been carried out against security personnel, the army, frontier corps, and the police personnel. And the Prime Minister of Pakistan is also on record that now it's a red line as far as attacks on Pakistan army is concerned.
Obaidullah, I am a bit surprised by the escalation right now, because there was a new diplomatic initiative. And in fact, the Pakistan airstrikes came on the very same day that Pakistan's newly appointed special envoy to Afghanistan, Mohammad Sadiq, had been in Kabul meeting the foreign minister and the interior minister. What do you make of that timing?
James, first, I think it's really important that we care for the terms we use. I think the term retaliation to attacks conducted within Pakistan by the TTP, which is a local insurgency, they are locals to Pakistan according to their records, cannot be a retaliatory attack when you cross borders and actually bomb a sovereign state. On the other hand, yes, there is confused messaging. You send a diplomatic delegation after months of tensions to sit down and have a conversation on the issue of TTP. However, on the same night of the meetings, you conduct illegitimate bombing. Now, the TTP issue and this escalation in tensions are symptoms of a much larger problem, honestly. The problem can be broken down to two subsections. One is the fact that Pakistan actually looks at Afghanistan. The Durand Line was mentioned earlier, but it seems that the fifth province syndrome from Pakistan, where they keep looking at Afghanistan as a territory that belongs to them, that they do not acknowledge the sovereignty and independence of, that has led them to constantly fuel turmoil within the country and harboring anti-state elements throughout their history. On the other side, there's the war on terror narrative. The problem with that is, and we see with Sadiq Khan's presence, they constantly undermine diplomatic efforts, because the war on terror meant that you could ignore international law, you could ignore borders and sovereignties of state by declaring a specific element a terrorist group, dehumanize them, violate international law, and bomb across borders. And somehow that is retaliation, and that is legitimized. All of these are problems that can only be solved once an ownership of the problem and the fact that local insurgencies are emerging in Pakistan are symptomatic of political tensions, grievances within local populations that need to be addressed without heavy-handed approaches, leading them to displace themselves into Afghanistan and still not find peace or dignity there, but be bombed at night and have 50 innocent lives lost.
Kathy, I think it's interesting that when you go back to the time when there were NATO and US commanders fighting the Taliban. They used to bemoan the safe haven the Taliban had on the other side of the border. Well, it's the same frontier area, the same ungoverned space that is now being used as the battlefield against Pakistan.
I think it's very interesting, James, and Obaidullah made some very good points. The thing is, and this happened when the Taliban were last in power, and isolation was used as the method of dealing with them rather than engaging with them, is that these groups did find safe havens. And Khyber, the acting minister of information, said just yesterday or today, said that the TTP will be allowed to stay in Afghanistan. There are a number of groups in Afghanistan. Not all of them are ones that the Taliban want there. The Islamic State in Khorasan is there. There are several other ones. The Uyghurs are there. The IMU, the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, quite a number. The UN have put out a report a couple of months ago just looking at the many different groups. So the reality is that since the Taliban took power in 2021 again, that the numbers of attacks inside Afghanistan have increased dramatically. And against the military forces and by the TTP, who do have a place in Afghanistan. Obaidullah is also very right, though, because things have sort of turned on its head, and Pakistan has some real issues in Baluchistan and in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, KPK, on the borders with Afghanistan, where the Baluch population are very unhappy. They're demonstrating. The people in KPK are demonstrating. In Khurram agency, right on the border with Afghanistan, you have a very nasty sectarian battle going on, and hundreds and hundreds of people have died. And the TTP are taking advantage of that. And so the TTP in Afghanistan are able to take advantage of what is, as Obaidullah rightly said, turmoil in Pakistan. And so they have gained a foothold in part of Khurram agency, and they're also helping to fuel this sectarian violence between the Shias and the Sunnis.
Okay, let me bring in Akhtar now, because we had mention of Baluchistan there, where there's the Baluchistan Liberation Army fighting for self-determination. In terms of the security forces of Pakistan, the authorities in Pakistan, how much concern is there with them compared with the Pakistan Taliban?
Pakistan is really concerned as far as the Baloch militancy is concerned. And it has its own dynamics as far as, and it is localized, it is confined to Balochistan, Baloch militants, as compared to the religious motivated militancy, which is transnational. Why Pakistan is more concerned as far as Baloch militancy is concerned? Because they are also hitting the economic corridor of Pakistan, which is CPAC, and the Gwadar seaport. So
this is the link, Akhtar. This is the link with China. This is the link with the Chinese link, the Belt and Road. This is the important route for China, and I believe the Baluchistan Liberation Army has also been attacking Chinese personnel and Chinese interests.
Yes, of course. Most of their attacks were against Chinese, and at the same time, they are also targeting the Punjabi ethnic groups who are working there as laborers or technicians. They think that since they are in minority, and if there is industrialization development, then they would further be marginalized over there. So it is basically, I would say, globalization versus nationalism of Baloch militants.
Okay. Obaidullah, given the tension, possible escalation, are there diplomatic options and diplomatic players who can sort this out? Where is a venue? I mean, I'm speaking to you from Doha. There have been lots of talks here on Afghanistan. Is there a role for the UN? Or is it, because I don't think it's Western nations anymore, is it China and Russia who need to get involved in this?
There are always diplomatic routes, even with groups within one's country that one delegitimizes by labeling as terrorists. There are genuine grievances. There are political demands that need to be at least heard, and some sort of internal negotiations need to be done. There's a problem with constantly scapegoating. You talked about BLA. BLA is then considered as a foreign Indian agenda group. The TTP is considered as an Afghan Taliban group. Then PTM, which is a Pashtun Tahaffuz nonviolent movement, they're considered as funded by abroad as well. Ultimately, the scapegoating needs to stop. Pakistan needs to look into its internal issues, but also I do understand that they do have concerns about the displaced people who are within Afghanistan's territory, movements of TTP across the borders, though the Afghan Taliban have clearly stated that it's very difficult to man this border, as Kathy rightly pointed out. However, Sadiq Khan's arrival was a step in the right direction. There are conversations that should be held. But before that conversations even start, there needs to be a clear vision on what Pakistan wants to do about the TTP. Whilst the Pakistani authorities don't know exactly what the ultimate solution they want for TTP is going to be, they cannot expect the Afghan Taliban to make enemies out of the TTP, especially considering that they have an ISKP threat already at their doorsteps that they're dealing with. They cannot risk making any more enemies, especially at a time when they have very little trust when it comes to Pakistan.
Okay, I just want to bring I want to bring in Kathy one last time as we look at possible diplomatic options, and I think we have to just mention this. It's 3 weeks until the inauguration. Trump will be back in the White House. Do you think the US has any interest in this region and getting involved in this region again, and particularly Donald Trump, who his main effort on Afghanistan was to get out as fast as possible?
I think that the international community has to return to re-engage with Afghanistan so that Afghans can figure out a solution. Between 1996 and 2001, they isolated the Taliban. Then it leaves the administration with very little options of who to engage with, how to engage. And so you're reducing the options rather than increasing the options to improve life in Afghanistan. And so I think, yes, there's a role. I think, yes, probably if Donald Trump, because under his administration, they did come up with the Doha Agreement. There was a lot of discussions with a lot of people who are now in positions of power in Afghanistan. If they do want to do something, do they want to? I'm not so sure. But people have to remember, the last time you ignored Afghanistan, you ended up with a serious problem in 9/11. Ignoring Afghanistan and ignoring Pakistan is not the answer. There has to be some sort of innovative thought that says, yes, get off your moral high horse, get back into the region and into the country and talk to the people and help them figure out what they want. That's my thought.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to our guests today, Syed Akhtar Ali Shah, Obaidullah Baheer and Kathy Gannon. We produce this programme every day of the year and it'll be coming to you every day in 2025 too. Watch us on television, on our app and on the website aljazeera.com. We want to hear from you. What should we discuss next time? Your comments are welcome on Facebook. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or you can use X where you'll find us at AJ Inside Story. For me, James Bays, and all the team here, stay safe and well. Bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.